My beloved child. The psychic had been talking for almost 20 minutes when she suddenly placed your photograph face down on the table. Your soulmate noticed the change immediately. Until then, the woman had spoken easily, asking questions, studying the photograph, offering impressions about distance, unfinished feelings, and the kind of emotional tension people sometimes carry long after a relationship changes. Then she looked at your picture again. Her expression tightened. She started a sentence. You are dealing with someone who is. And stopped. Your soulmate leaned forward. Who is what? The woman didn't answer. She slid the photograph back across the table and quietly said, I don't think I should finish that sentence for you. That was the moment the appointment stopped feeling entertaining. Because your soulmate had not gone there searching for a prophecy. Not really. They had gone because they were tired of not understanding you. And even more tired of not understanding themselves. For weeks, perhaps months, one question had followed them into quiet rooms, long drives, crowded stores, and late evenings when distractions finally stopped working. Why did you become so different? Not cruel. Not dramatic. Different. You stopped chasing conversations that went nowhere. You stopped trying to decode silence. You stopped carrying the emotional weight of two people. And from the outside, that change looked almost like indifference. Your soulmate couldn't decide whether you had healed. Or simply stopped caring. So when someone at work casually mentioned knowing a woman who did private intuitive readings, your soulmate laughed. At first. I don't believe in that stuff. The coworker shrugged. Then don't believe. Maybe you'll still hear something useful. That sentence stayed with them longer than it should have. 3 days later, your photograph was sitting on a stranger's table. It was not even a recent photograph. That was the first strange detail. Your soulmate had newer pictures of you. They could have opened social media and chosen one in seconds. Instead, they used an older photo saved deep inside their phone. A photo they had told themselves they kept accidentally. You were not posing in it. You were looking away from the camera, half smiling at something outside the frame. And when the psychic asked why they had chosen that particular photograph, your soulmate became defensive. It was just the first one I found. It wasn't. They had passed 4 newer photographs before selecting it. Because that picture belonged to a version of the relationship they still understood. Before the silence. Before the misunderstandings. Before every conversation seemed to carry another conversation underneath it. Before you learned that love could exist beside exhaustion. The psychic did not know any of that. She simply looked at the picture and asked, "What happened between you two?" Your soulmate gave the answer they had repeated enough times to make it sound true. They pulled away. The woman looked up. That's what happened. Yes. Or that's what you experienced. That distinction irritated them. Because they had spent months building a clean explanation. You changed. You became distant. You stopped trying. You made the ending inevitable. It was simpler that way. Pain usually becomes easier to carry when one person gets assigned the role of the one who caused it. Then the psychic asked another question. What did they say before they became distant? Your soulmate frowned. I don't remember. But they did. The memory arrived so quickly that their body reacted before their pride could stop it. A kitchen. A cup growing cold beside your hand. Your voice quieter than usual. You had said, "I don't know how many times I can tell you the same thing before I start feeling foolish for saying it." At the time, your soulmate had heard criticism. Now, sitting across from a stranger, they remembered something different. You had looked tired. Not angry. Tired. The psychic couldn't know what that meant. She wasn't inside your relationship. She couldn't verify your private history. But the question had opened a door your soulmate had kept locked because opening it required looking at their own behavior. That was when she turned the photograph over again. She studied it. Then she said the unfinished words. "You are dealing with someone who is." Silence. "Who is what?" your soulmate asked again. The woman shook her head. "I don't want to give you a label that becomes an excuse." An excuse for what? For avoiding the conversation you already know you need to have. Your soulmate sat back. That was not the dramatic prediction they had expected. No promise that you were destined to return. No date. No certainty. No supernatural declaration. Just a sentence that left responsibility sitting directly in front of them. They asked, "Do you think we're supposed to be together?" The psychic gave a small, almost tired smile. "I think people ask that when they're afraid to ask a harder question." What question? Were you good to each other when you had the chance? Your soulmate said nothing. On the drive home, they almost deleted your photograph. They opened their phone at a red light, found the image, pressed their thumb against the screen. And stopped. Because underneath the photograph was its original date. That date changed something. It had been taken only 11 days before the conversation in the kitchen. 11 days before you told them you were tired of repeating yourself. Your soulmate had always remembered that period differently. They believed the distance appeared suddenly. But suddenly was becoming difficult to defend. The next evening, they opened your old message thread. Not because the psychic told them to. Because the date on the photograph had started bothering them. They scrolled farther back than they had in months. There were ordinary messages first. Groceries. Work complaints. Pictures. Jokes that only made sense to the two of you. Then the tone shifted so gradually they nearly missed it. You had started asking for clarity. "Are we still doing dinner tonight?" No answer for 6 hours. "Can you just tell me when you need space instead of disappearing?" A reply the next morning. "Sorry. Busy." A week later. "I don't need constant attention. I just need to know where I stand." Their response. Why does everything have to become a serious conversation? Your soulmate stared at that message longer than any psychic could have predicted. Because suddenly the story was changing. You had not begun with distance. You had begun with requests. Small ones. Clear ones. Tell me when plans change. Don't disappear after conflict. Say what you're feeling. Don't make me guess. And every time those requests created discomfort, your soulmate postponed them. Not always maliciously. Sometimes they truly were busy. Sometimes they were afraid. Sometimes they had grown up believing that avoiding conflict was the same thing as keeping peace. Sometimes intimacy felt safe until it required accountability. But the result for you was the same. You had to keep asking for basic emotional clarity. Until eventually you stopped asking. Your soulmate had interpreted that silence as proof you no longer cared. Now they were considering another possibility. Maybe silence had been what remained after you realized asking was no longer changing anything. They closed the message thread. 10 minutes later, they reopened it. Near the bottom was a message they had forgotten completely. You had written, "I don't want to leave. I just don't want to keep disappearing inside this relationship." They had answered with a heart emoji. Nothing else. Your soulmate actually whispered, "Oh, God." Not because a prediction had come true. Because a memory had. That night they called the coworker who had recommended the psychic. What did she tell you when you saw her? The coworker laughed. Why? I just want to know. She mostly asked questions. Did she ever refuse to finish something? There was a pause. What happened? Your soulmate explained. Not everything. Just enough. The coworker listened and finally said, maybe she stopped because she realized you were going to make her responsible for whatever you did next. That landed harder than expected. I'm not doing that. Aren't you? Your soulmate became quiet. The coworker continued. You asked a stranger whether you should contact someone you already hurt. Maybe the real question is whether contacting them would help them or just make you feel better. The call ended politely. The thought did not. For the first time, your soulmate understood that missing you did not automatically give them permission to re-enter your life. Regret was real. Love could be real too. But neither erased consequences. That realization changed what they did next. They did not call you. They did not send an emotional paragraph at midnight. They did not create a new account to see what you were doing. They did not ask mutual friends to investigate whether you were seeing someone. Instead, they opened a blank note on their phone and wrote the message they wanted to send. Then they left it unsent. The first version was beautiful. Too beautiful. I've never stopped loving you. I think about you every day. I know we're meant to. They stopped. Deleted most of it. Because the psychic's question returned. Were you good to each other when you had the chance? The second version became less romantic. More uncomfortable. I've been looking back at how things ended. I blamed you for becoming distant, but I'm starting to understand that I ignored things you tried to tell me before you pulled away. That was harder to write. So they continued. You asked for communication. I often treated that like pressure. You asked for consistency. I acted like you were asking for too much. I can see how lonely that must have felt. Then their thumb froze over the keyboard. Because another fear appeared. What if you read it and said nothing? For months, your soulmate had imagined reunion as a relief. They had not spent much time imagining accountability without reward. An apology that might never receive forgiveness. A truth that might arrive too late. That was different. And somewhere in that difference, their feelings began becoming more mature. A few days passed. Then something happened they had not expected. Your name came up at a family dinner. Not because anyone knew about the psychic. Not because you had contacted anyone. Your soulmate's older sister was looking through photographs on her phone, searching for a picture from a birthday several years earlier. She found one with you standing in the background. "Oh," she said softly. "I forgot this was from when you two were together." Your soulmate tried to change the subject. "Their mother didn't. I always liked them." "Mom." "What?" "I did." The sister looked across the table. "Do you ever talk anymore?" "No." "Why not?" Your soulmate gave the old answer automatically. They pulled away. Their sister stared at them for a moment. Then she said, "That's not how I remember it." The room became strangely quiet. Your soulmate turned toward her. "What does that mean?" She put the phone down. "You really don't remember?" "Remember what?" "The night they called me." Your soulmate's expression changed. You had never told them about that call. Their sister explained. Months before the relationship finally ended, you had reached out after a difficult argument. Not to complain. Not to make their family choose sides. You had asked one question. "Is this how they handle stress with everyone, or is it just with me?" Their sister had told you the truth. When overwhelmed, your soulmate withdrew. Sometimes for days. They had done it with family for years. The sister had even defended them. "They don't mean anything by it. That's just how they are." And according to her, your answer had been gentle. "I know. But being hurt without someone meaning to hurt you still hurts." Your soulmate lowered their eyes. Their mother asked, "You didn't know they called?" "No." The sister shook her head. "They weren't trying to make you look bad. They sounded like they were trying to understand you." There it was. Another reversal. For months, your soulmate believed you withdrew because you misunderstood them. Now they were discovering how hard you had tried to understand. They asked their sister why she had never told them. "I thought you knew." "I didn't." "Well, what difference would it have made back then?" Your soulmate opened their mouth. Nothing came out. Because they weren't sure. Back then, they might have become defensive. They might have accused you of talking about private matters. They might have focused on the fact that you called instead of the reason you felt desperate enough to call. Sometimes truth arriving later hurts because we are finally mature enough to understand information we would once have rejected. That evening, your soulmate added another sentence to the unsent message. "I also learned that you tried to understand me long before you gave up on being understood by me." Then they stopped writing. Because something else had changed. You had changed. Not in the mystical way people sometimes describe transformation. In ordinary, observable ways. Mutual acquaintances no longer heard you asking about your soulmate. You stopped posting sad, indirect messages. You stopped reacting to things that once would have pulled you into emotional chaos. When their names surfaced in conversation, you did not freeze. You did not perform indifference either. You simply continued with your life. That frightened your soulmate more than anger would have. Anger would have meant they still occupied active space in your nervous system. Your calm suggested you had learned how to live without needing their next move. For a long time, they had unconsciously assumed your love would remain available. Not because they were cruel. Because familiarity creates dangerous assumptions. They thought there would always be another conversation. Another opening. Another chance to explain later. Another moment when you would soften first. But the version of you they were hearing about now seemed unwilling to bargain with your own peace. You could still care. You could still remember. You could even forgive. And still decide not to return to the same pattern. That distinction unsettled them. One evening, they finally called the psychic again. Not for another reading. For one question. When you stopped that sentence, what were you going to say? The woman remembered them. There was silence on the phone. Then she said, I was going to say you were dealing with someone who was finished waiting for potential. Your soulmate's stomach tightened. Is that what you saw? No, she said carefully. It's what I thought based on what you told me. That mattered. She was not claiming supernatural certainty. She continued. You kept describing this person as loving, patient, forgiving, and exhausted. People sometimes mistake patience for unlimited access. Your soulmate leaned against the kitchen counter. So you think it's over? I think you're asking me again to decide something that belongs to two people. Then what am I supposed to do? Decide who you are if they never come back. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. But that final question followed them for days. Who are you if they never come back? That was the question regret usually avoids. Because if change only happens to win someone back, it is negotiation. If change survives even when reconciliation doesn't happen, it becomes growth. Your soulmate began looking at parts of themselves that had nothing to do with you. Their conflict avoidance. Their tendency to shut down instead of communicate. Their habit of assuming people knew what they felt. Their belief that saying, I love you, should somehow compensate for behavior that made love difficult to experience. They had cared. Deeply. That had never been the whole problem. The problem was that caring privately does not always create safety publicly. You cannot build trust from feeling someone is forced to guess. You cannot ask another person to feel secure inside repeated uncertainty. And you cannot keep calling someone the love of your life, while treating honest communication like an inconvenience. Weeks earlier, your soulmate's biggest question had been whether you still loved them. Now a more uncomfortable question had replaced it. If you did still love them, what version of them would you be asked to love? The same person who disappeared when uncomfortable? The same person who waited until losing you to become honest? The same person who apologized beautifully and changed temporarily? Or someone capable of consistency even when there was no immediate reward? That was the real future no psychic could read for them. It had to be built. The unsent message remained on their phone for 12 days. Every day they changed something. They removed promises they could not guarantee. They removed pressure. They removed phrases designed to make you feel guilty. They removed, I need you. They removed, we belong together. They removed anything that made their regret your responsibility. What remained was simpler. I've been looking honestly at how I contributed to what happened between us. I understand more now about what you were asking for, and I'm sorry I made you feel like basic communication was too much to need. You don't owe me a response. I'm not sending this to disrupt your peace. I wanted to acknowledge what I failed to acknowledge when we were together. Then one final sentence. If there is ever a conversation between us again, I would want to enter it differently. They read it several times. Their hand hovered over send. And for the first time in this entire story, sending the message was not automatically the brave choice. Because bravery sometimes means speaking. Sometimes it means respecting distance. Your soulmate remembered your last real conversation. You had said, "Please don't come back only because being without me finally hurts." At the time, they thought the sentence was unfair. Now they understood it. You weren't asking whether losing you would hurt. You were asking whether loving you could become different. That was the sentence that decided everything. Your soulmate did not send the message that night. They waited. Not as a strategy. Not to manipulate timing. They waited because they wanted to be certain the message was an apology rather than an emotional emergency disguised as one. A few days later, an unexpected opportunity appeared. A mutual friend invited both of you to the same small gathering. Your soulmate saw your name in the group chat. For several minutes, they stared at it. Months earlier, they would have treated the invitation like fate. A sign. Proof that the universe was putting you back together. Now they did something different. They messaged the host privately. "Do they know I'm invited?" The friend replied, "Yes." "Are they comfortable with that?" A few minutes passed. "Yes." I asked. Your soulmate exhaled. That single act, checking your comfort before pursuing their own desire, would have seemed insignificant once. Now it represented everything. The gathering arrived. You were already there when your soulmate walked in. There was no dramatic music. No collision across a crowded room. No magical certainty. Just two people who had once known each other's smallest habit standing several feet apart with an entire history between them. Your soulmate noticed something immediately. You looked peaceful. Not performatively happy. Not cold. Peaceful. You smiled. "Hey." They answered, "Hey." For a moment, neither of you knew what to do with your hands. Then you asked how they had been. They could have lied. "Good." Instead they said, "Learning some things." You gave a small nod. "Me too." Someone called your name from across the room. Before you turned away, your soulmate said, "I owe you an apology." You became still. They continued before fear could turn the moment into another retreat. "Not here. And not unless you ever want to hear it. I just wanted you to know I understand that now." You looked at them for several seconds. Then said, "Thank you for saying it that way." No reunion followed. No promise. No immediate forgiveness wrapped in cinematic certainty. But something important had changed. The old version of your relationship depended on urgency. One person pulling away. The other pursuing. One becoming overwhelmed. The other trying harder. Then roles reversing. This moment contained something the old relationship rarely had. Space. Choice. Respect. Later that night, your soulmate returned home and opened the photograph that had started everything. The same picture they had taken to the psychic. You, looking away from the camera. Half smiling. For months, that image represented the person they had lost. Now it meant something else. It reminded them of the person they had once loved without fully knowing how to care for that love. And perhaps more importantly, it reminded them that you were no longer simply the person in an old photograph. You had kept living. You had changed. You had learned that love does not require endless waiting. That forgiveness does not require reopening every door. That understanding someone's wounds does not obligate you to accept being wounded by them. And your soulmate was beginning to learn something too. The future was never hidden inside that photograph. It was not waiting inside a psychic's unfinished sentence. It was not guaranteed by chemistry, history, longing, destiny, or regret. The future depended on what two people chose to become after finally seeing the past clearly. Maybe one day there will be another conversation. Maybe there will be several. Maybe trust can slowly be rebuilt. Maybe the healthiest ending is simply that both of you leave the old pattern behind, whether you walk forward together or separately. But the question is no longer whether your soulmate still feels something. Feelings were never the missing piece. The harder question is whether those feelings can become honesty when honesty is uncomfortable. Consistency when nobody is applauding. Respect when the answer might be no. And accountability without demanding a second chance as payment. That is why the psychic went silent. Not because she had discovered some terrifying secret about your destiny. Perhaps she simply recognized that finishing the sentence for your soulmate would let them avoid finishing something far more important themselves. You are. They once wanted a stranger to complete those words. Now the answer belongs to you. You are not the person who has to wait forever to prove your love. You are not required to shrink your needs so another person can remain comfortable. You are not difficult because you ask for clarity. You are not heartless because peace became more important than emotional chaos. And if someone returns to your life, their strongest proof will not be how intensely they missed you when you were gone. It will be whether they learned how to honor your presence when they are given the privilege of standing beside you again.